big round of applause to all of you. I'm Shoma Chaudhary. I'm the founder of Synapse and Lucid Lines. And again, on behalf of all our patrons, partners, and the entire team at Synapse, I extend a very warm welcome to all of you for day 2 of Synapse. Yesterday, we heard about many facets of this hinge moment in history. I think there could be no doubt that we are at a time of extreme acceleration as well as convergence, and we explored that in many ways. We're going to go further down that journey today, looking at the three sort of troika of nature, humans, and technology, and the complex ways in which these are interacting in completely new frameworks of conversation. Yesterday, while I was on stage, I wanted to keep pinching myself that we were actually discussing in all seriousness with some of the most cutting-edge minds in the world about actually passing on the baton of the human race to other species, you know, in utter seriousness. And just one other anecdote on that. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the fact that just a week or 10 days ago, there was global news again about a phenomenon called Moltbook, which was a social network for AI bots and agents, where humans could only observe, but it was AI agents chatting with each other, discussing philosophy and language and human overthrow. And it was something that, you know, Andres Karpathy, again, a very cutting-edge AI scientist, he wrote an entire blog about it, taking it very seriously. And Elon Musk tweeted saying, this is concerning, and a kind of presentiment of what is to come. It turned out that it was a bit of a hoax and a joke. But again, like I'm saying, the waters are heating, we're adapting, we're beginning to take it for granted that machines could be chatting with each other, even about secret languages and secret religions. And we're kind of just warming up to those ideas without discussion. And that's why this platform really matters, because it is a Constituent Assembly debate. All of us have to participate in the nature of not just this technology, but bioengineering, life sciences, all of the really exciting, fantastical powers and forces and imagination coming together to define the next phase of human civilization. So it really is a very important conversation, and it has been enabled by an amazing range of patrons, absolutely foremost amongst them, our presenting partners, Shiv Nadar Foundation. A huge thanks to Roshni Nadar, Shikhal Malhotra, Sundar Mahaligam, all of whom are in the audience today. They're the most gracious partners because they believe in ideas, and Shiv Nadar Foundation's philosophy is creative philanthropy. They have 7 eminent institutions, you know, universities and schools, and this idea infuses their institutions that society can be transformed only through the power of ideas and education. And they make that opportunity available not just to those who are fortunate, but even those who are economically or socially disenfranchised. And their community extends to more than 1 lakh of students, teachers drawn from the best faculties, and their own students are taken up by Fortune 500 companies. They go to the Ivy League colleges. But really, we have been the beneficiary of a philanthropic vision that believes in the ephemerals that make a society robust. And a huge thank you to them, because it really is them that makes this possible. So another round of applause to them, please. I'd also like to thank the Glenlivet, amazing, gracious partner. You know, we've all enjoyed their hospitality, but the reason they really partner with us is that for 200 years, they have wanted to align with the idea of originality. They were born in the Space Side, which is a geographic region, you know, absolutely aligned, with, synonymous with the idea of single malt whiskies, but they have defined that geographic location. You know, their entire offering is connected with the idea of innovation, progress, and originality. But they support Synapse because this is, first and foremost, a platform of original thinking. So big thank you to the Glenlivet. We'd also like to thank BMW. Their beautiful car is outside. Anybody buying a car, please switch your business to them, because that's really what will ensure that they stay with us. But the reason they are here, again, is not just for their products, but because it is anchored by an idea of the BMW Excellence Club, which again offers experiences both in cultural leadership, travel, you know, human experiences that go beyond the quantifiable, and that is their reason for supporting Synapse. We also have HCL Software. Like I laughed and said yesterday, this is the double engine behind Synapse. That HCL Software comes from the same family of the Shivnadar Group and HCL Technologies, and yet they're supporting us. It's a huge, pillar that really keeps this afloat. And they're functioning at that very crucial intersection of sovereignty by choice. We heard yesterday how significant this conversation is when not just us as citizens, but our enterprises and countries itself will now depend on how much sovereignty there is over data and infrastructure. And that is where HCL Software, one of the largest enterprise solution companies in the country, has positioned themselves to create intelligent infrastructure, data solutions that are secure and that are scalable across many enterprises as well as government enterprises. So big thank you to them. I'd like to thank Nuvama Wealth. Again, they have partnered with us because they understand that wealth creation itself is a constantly evolving field. And while they have many legacy businesses, they manage more than 4 trillion rupees of assets. They have more than 1 million investors. They are advisors to more than 4,000 ultra high net worth families. But they are also managing and raising capital for first generation entrepreneurs. They are helping families understand how to preserve wealth. But the needle of wealth is really shifting. Wealth creation is shifting. And that's why they're really, big partners of Synapse, because this is where you understand where the needle is shifting in terms of economic enterprise, where wealth will concentrate, where the opportunities lie. So thank you to Nuvama. I'd like to thank again Homage and Velankani Group. Homage, led by Aditya Ghosh, is both personally and as a company been a great champion, and a big thank you to them. He advises many enterprises and new startups, helps them scale, has kept employees at the heart of his advice and employee-centric companies. And at a time when we're talking so much about replacing humans, that's again a very unique feature for anybody to have and focus on in terms of investments. The Velankani Group, led by Kiran Shah, again, personally, somebody who's championed us beyond measure. But Velankani Group, again, has positioned itself in a very important moment in the nation's history. Viksit Bharat, Make in India, they're creating AI, indigenously built data centers, which are scalable, which are energy efficient, and most crucially, geographically located in India. This is infrastructure as sovereignty, and they're really trying to position India as a nation that's computing for the world. So thank you to Kiran Shah and Velankani. And then to make my trip, they are synonymous with all of us. For 25 years, they've been the go-to app for travel, but they too have now made themselves an AI-enabled super travel app, to create frictionless travel. And they are also beginning to, next year, they'll be offering a luxury app for kind of journeys that you can't imagine, which they will curate. So a big thank you to Make My Trip. To Manipal Group, who are again focused very much on the intersection of trust and transformation. And it's really, these words have got infused with meaning at a time when so much is in flux. They create solutions for smart card technologies, digital payments, but the key values that really underpin all the offerings that they have is progress with reliability and keeping humans at the center of it. And then I'd like to thank Anthill Ventures, Prasad Vanga. They, again, are a scale studio for a lot of startup ventures. 45% of those are women entrepreneurs, so that's really unique about what Anthill Ventures does. We'd like to thank Deep Holistics, led by Sanat. Their stall is outside. Why should we only speak about wealth managers? We really do need health managers. And he has an app offering which is for predictive health. Please do go and check it out. And then we have Paradigm IT, which is a sovereign AI in a box. They are offering solutions, again, for intelligent infrastructure, really trying to secure India in terms of enterprises, governance, and they are offering data, all of that, solutions which are sovereign and secure for India. Then we have 360-degree, which is the wonderful, comfortable leather sofas that you see all around. So whenever you sit on a comfortable sofa, think of 360, and we're very happy to have them as partners. Now, before we really dive into the array of conversations today, I would love to invite Shikhar Malhotra, our patron, to share a few words about why they back Synapse and what is the vision that's driving their own foundation. Shikhar, we'd love to have you on stage.
Good morning. Oh, it's filled up completely. So I think I completely echo what Shoma said. It's pretty remarkable to be here on a Sunday morning. If you can wake up Gurgaon on a Sunday morning to be here, obviously it has to be an absolutely... Morning. There we go. Okay. It's pretty amazing to be here on a Sunday morning. And if you can wake up Gurgaon, obviously to be here on a Sunday morning, it has to be a pretty incredible event. It's been... Thank you. It's been a hell of a week. All about AI, predicting the future through some heavy-hitting speakers, that we saw in Delhi this last week. I don't think there could be a better way to wrap up this week with, rather than actually through Synapse. I don't think AI is going to stop here. It's obviously going to keep going. It's also been Shiv Nada Foundation's privilege to sponsor Synapse for the last 3 years. And I think over these last 3 years, in this very room, I've met perhaps the most diverse and intellectually charged group of people, entrepreneurs, technologists, scientists, homemakers, monks, you name it. I think it's been amazing, and the binding quality of every single person that's here is curiosity. And I think curiosity is a simple enough reason for all of us actually to have a common shared vision about what the present and the future both mean. When Shoma met us 3 years ago with this riveting idea for Synapse, and she gave this very incredible pitch, we said yes in a synaptic second, because we loved the idea and we felt that this was... Shoma, is that your phone? Okay. I think it's beeping quite a bit. So the Shiv Nada Foundation's always championed intellectual prowess through human capacity building in India and globally. We're driven by this passionate desire to continuously play our part in putting India on the map. As I drove in last night, I was also really pleasantly surprised to see HCL Software up there. And I think that Shoma just pointed it out. The HCL Software is a sister organization of Shiv Nada Foundation. I think only Shoma is skilled enough to get us to sponsor the same event twice. So I need to learn some of these Jedi sales skills that Shoma has. And I think that no matter what AI you're going to build, you're all going to need to sell, so you better talk to her later. What I personally love about Synapse is this mind-bending, out-of-the-box, stirring-the-pot quality that makes you momentarily feel, do we honestly live in this reality? You know it's a great event when it leaves you asking for more, and it leaves you with this incredible feeling of the Synapse next year, and who are they going to bring? It's never really a dull day at Shiv Nada Foundation, and we're blessed to have an institution that shares very similar beliefs and qualities, especially through the impact that it creates through human potential multiplied through technology. Whether you're someone working on Mangalyaan at ISRO, or you're summiting Everest at 18, or making prosthetic legs for dogs, you're pitching on Shark Tank, or if you're a 15-year-old called Pranit, who should be in this room somewhere, winning 15 lakh rupees at the AI Summit through the Honorable Minister of Technology, or being even a child from a rural village in Uttar Pradesh who's now a high-ranking banker on Wall Street, the Shiv Nada Foundation kids are doing it all. When I asked Manu, a student from rural Uttar Pradesh who studied at Shiv Nada Foundation's Vidyagyan Leadership Academy and belongs to a family of 10 that live in one home, what the hardest part about studying at Stanford is, he paused for a second and he said, I think understanding the concept of personal space. There's some things that AI is not going to fix, right? But for the rest of it, I'm just happy that we have a platform to put people on the world map, and there's students studying everywhere, and every time a student goes to one of these high-ranking academic institutions, the actually enrollment from the villages that they belong to goes up. It's a pretty powerful force multiplier. Yesterday was a historic day for HCL, as the foundation stone for Uttar Pradesh's first semiconductor OSAT facility was laid by the Honorable Prime Minister in Jewar. To do that also in HCL's 50th year is all the more humbling and a reminder that there is no replacement for human belief and perseverance. We had a small gathering of 12,000 people. And amongst a sea of people, there was an overwhelming emotion, and that was of pride and excitement. Also, if anyone wants to know how long it takes to drive from Jewar to Gurgaon, talk to me later. Having spent over $2 billion in these last 30 years, we are aiming to spend that just in the next 7 years. And I think we're proud actually to spend that in absolute capacity building through institutions, through programs. I know, Shoma, you said 7, but actually 13 institutions in the foundation. With a student strength of 18,000 and alumni strength of 40,000, these students are waiting to take a grip on all the opportunities and possibilities that the world has to offer. 2 years from now, when the Shiv Nadar Foundation opens its doors to the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art, being built on the NH8, if you've ever seen those big hoardings, it'll open in 2 years. We would love to host Synapse over there. And I think this absolutely incredible location, matching the intellectual conversations that will be taking place inside 1.2 million square feet and 16,000 works of art, you're absolutely guaranteed an experience of a lifetime. With art and technology juxtaposed, I don't think there could be more symbolic and fitting as a metaphor for life that we live in. Having said that, thank you all for having us here, and we're super proud to be part of Synapse, and I look forward to meeting many of you through the day.
And now we'd like to dive into the first conversation of the day, which is really at the profound intersection of spirituality and science. This is supposed to be the most ephemeral aspect of us, our search for divinity, our transcendent experiences. But at the heart of that question and that heart of that experience is itself a scientific question, which is that does our brain create the idea of God? Or do our spiritual experiences transform our brains? And this is a question: what is consciousness? What is divinity? What is the transcendent which goes beyond physicality? To have that conversation between spiritual and science is a very, very special session. And leading that will be Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist that's working in a new field called neurotheology, which looks at the biology of belief itself. What happens to our brains when we have faith? And he will be showing us what happens to the brain, and then we'll take the conversation further from there. But before we enter that world, again, we have a little film to give us, to take us into that portal and that experience of transcendence. And then we'll call Andrew on stage.
see you. Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be here to talk about the research that I've been engaged in over the past 30 years. As we had some of our initial conversations about coming to the conference and the discussions that we will have, I realized that it was probably important to share with you a little bit about the actual science of the research that I have been doing. So I'm just going to spend about 10 minutes going over what we have learned so far and give you a little taste of what the brain imaging studies that we are doing looking at spiritual experiences can show us. I think one of the most important things to realize is that there is so much for us to learn. And that means that we can look at so many different aspects of spiritual experiences, from the everyday experience that somebody might have just meditating or praying just for a few moments, to the profound mystical experiences that many people have had throughout the centuries and throughout the millennia. So there's a religious and spiritual continuum that we can explore, and we can try to understand what's going on in the brain when people engage these different kinds of experiences. Let's see. There we go. A lot of my work has come under the notion of a concept called neurotheology. I don't know how much you have heard of this term. It is a field of study that is, in very simplistic terms, trying to understand the relationship between our brain and our spiritual selves. Now, very specifically, it's about the brain and theology, neurotheology, but it goes so far beyond that. We can look at all the different ways in which our mind, our consciousness, our brain helps us to engage the spiritual side of who we are. And of course, we're not just talking about theology itself, although we can certainly explore how we think about spiritual ideas, about religions and so forth, but we can also start to think about the various practices, the experiences, the beliefs that all of us hold from the different traditions that we come from. And I think another important aspect of all of this is that it ranges from the very practical to the very philosophical. So we can ask practical questions. If we meditate, if we pray, and it helps us to improve depression or anxiety, how is that happening? On the other hand, we can also ask fundamental questions about the nature of existence, how we perceive the truth of the reality around us, questions about free will, questions about morality and ethics. So there's so many questions that we can begin to explore and look at this very multidisciplinary path of trying to understand them by not just going into the sacred texts, but how these ultimately resonate within the biology of who we are. Now, I'm not really sure how much neuroscience all of you have, so I'm going to give you a very brief description of some of the areas of the brain that I think are involved. An important point, one of the key take-home messages that I always like to emphasize, is that while we can talk about a lot of different parts of the brain, there has not been one part of the brain that is just the spiritual part. There isn't just one part of our brain that turns on when we meditate and then goes away when we stop. In fact, if any of you have a very profound spiritual part of yourself, you understand that it includes your thoughts, your emotions, your experiences. So in many ways, it actually involves all the different parts of your brain. And since the brain is intimately connected to the body, as I have often said, if there is a spiritual part of who we are, it's all of us. It's the whole part of our being. And I think that's very important for us to remember. But with that in mind, we can look at some specific areas of the brain. So if you're looking at these slides here, you can see that in the right now, well, I guess we're sort of looking this way. Okay. So the large part in the front of the brain is the frontal lobe, and that helps us to concentrate. It helps us to focus our attention. It helps us to regulate our emotional responses. And so that becomes very important when you think about a practice like meditation, where you are profoundly concentrating, when you're focusing your attention on things. Along the side of the brain is the temporal lobe, and that helps us with language and understanding different concepts. Interestingly, in the lower part of the temporal lobe, it also helps with visual interpretation of the world. So if you're looking at a visual symbol, if you're trying to focus your mind on a candle, for example, while you're meditating, it's your visual areas of the brain that are part of that process. And towards the back top part of the brain is a large area called the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe takes our sensory information and helps us to construct a spatial representation of ourself. And what we have found over time, and I'll show you a couple of brain scans in a moment, that this is an area that gets affected when we begin to lose our sense of self, when we begin to lose our sense of space and time. A little deeper inside of the brain are some very key structures, such as the limbic system, areas of the brain or structures of the brain called the hippocampus and the amygdala, which you may have heard of through some of the different media and scientific studies that have been done. These are part of the emotional centers of our brain. And of course, religious and spiritual experiences often are associated with very profound emotional effects on people. So now I'm going to show you a couple of brain scans. If I can get this going here. I'm not sure where I'm angling this. When we have done research asking people about their most profound spiritual experiences, and we've gotten several thousand descriptions. So this is not just from the sacred texts of all the great traditions of the world. This is from people. This is from people like you and me who may have had some profound spiritual experience. And when we've looked at all of these descriptions, we've realized that there are 5 core components that people talk about: a sense of intensity, a sense of clarity, a sense of unity, a sense of surrender, and a sense of transformational permanence. So where do these kinds of experiences affect us in the brain? So now we're looking at what's called a SPECT scan. There are different ways of taking images of the brain, and a SPECT scan, which stands for single photon emission computed tomography, helps us to look at blood flow in the brain, which normally correlates with activity. The more an area of the brain is turned on, the more blood flow it gets. The more it turns off, the less blood flow it gets. And what you're looking at here is basically a slice through the brain, and at the very top of the picture is where our frontal lobe is, if you're kind of looking as if I was lying down. And at the bottom of the scan is the back of the brain, and the colors represent the activity. So the red areas are the most active, followed by the yellow, the blue, and the black. So what we're looking at here is just the brain of somebody who's at rest, who's about to begin a meditation practice. And you can see that the red areas are kind of distributed throughout the brain. But if you look at where the arrow is pointing, that is in the limbic system, that emotional center of the brain. And if you see what happens where that arrow is pointing when the person is deep in their meditation practice, all of a sudden you get this very big blob of this red activity. So it goes from an area that's just kind of modestly on to being very intensely on, because part of what they talked about in their experience was a profound sense of awe and joy that was part of the experience. So that may have something to do with the fact that the amygdala and the hippocampus are turning on so that they have a strong emotional response. And interestingly, these are areas of the brain that also write information into our memory banks. So that's part of why these spiritual experiences are not only so important in the moment, but become part of the ways in which we think and believe about the world around us. Another very central area of the brain is called the thalamus. And this is in the center of the brain. You can see these 2 little red dots. So here again is a person at rest before they begin their meditation. And when they begin to meditate, you're going to see a very fundamental shift in how the thalamus is working, the 2 sides of the thalamus is working. And the reason that this is important is that this has something to do with the sense of clarity of these experiences. You can see because it's central, it helps to connect all the different parts of the brain. It also helps to bring sensory information up into the brain. So it helps us to construct our perception of reality around us. And you can see at the resting state here, how that changes. There's a shift from one side to the other. It's pretty balanced here. And then all of a sudden you get the shift. And we think that that's part of what happens when a person experiences a new way of thinking about the world. It changes the way they perceive their reality. The parietal lobe, as I mentioned, is involved in our spatial relations. And in the resting state, when the person's just sitting there quietly, both sides of that parietal lobe seem to be pretty equal in their activity. But when they begin to meditate, if you look at where that arrow is, all of a sudden one of the sides of the parietal lobe starts to shut down. In fact, both sides can shut down. But if this is the area that normally helps us to have a spatial sense of ourself, what happens when it shuts down? Well, we lose that sense of self, and we lose the ability for us to understand the relationship between ourself and other objects in the world, a sense of oneness, if you will, a loss of the sense of ego self. And finally, the feeling of surrender that I was talking about. So when you're meditating, you turn on your frontal lobe because you're concentrating. But if somebody has a profound mystical experience, one of the most common things that they describe to us is that they kind of lose their purposefulness. They feel like it's taking them over. They surrender to the experience. And what we have found there is that the frontal lobe, which normally turns on when you're concentrating, and you can see the yellow and the red there, suddenly shuts down. And so when the frontal lobe quiets down, we begin to lose that sense of purposefulness and attention, and we surrender to the experience itself. These experiences also can change us over time, and we've done brain scans that actually can show that, and I'm trying to keep this pretty short, so I'm going to go on to the scans real fast. This is a study of a Kirtan Kriya meditation, and if you look at the A scan and the C scan, these are the scans at rest. And so what we see here is the thalamus again shifting in its activity, and this is not while they're meditating, that this is because they have done a meditation program for about 2 months, and it changes the way their brain is operating. Also, if you look at the very top of the C scan, you'll see a little bit more red activity than you see in the A scan, because their frontal lobe actually has changed its underlying physiological function. And that allows us to understand how these practices change us over time. And interestingly, not only do they change in terms of general activity, but they change the neurotransmitters, the chemicals in the brain, like dopamine and serotonin. You can see how the person's brain looks before they went through a spiritual retreat and how it looks after. There are shifts in how the brain responds to dopamine. It actually becomes more sensitive to dopamine. And we think that that's also associated with the changes that these practices have on our entire being, on our emotional set point, and the ways in which we think about the world. So these practices dramatically change us. They change our brain, they change our biology, and of course they change us spiritually. And we have the ability to begin to look at these kinds of experiences and how they change us through this kind of research. So I'm going to leave that there. And if any of you would like to follow any of the research in much more detail, and I know we'll have more conversations right now, you're welcome to look at this up on my website and follow me on Instagram. So thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm very soon going to be calling another speaker on stage to give us a completely different dimension on this. But before that, Andrew, I wanted to explore some, critical ideas in your work. And there are 4 of them, and I'm going to quickly enumerate it so that we go through it. One was what you just showed, that our spiritual practices actually alter the physiology of our brain. And, we'll discuss whether this is a precursor to our experience or is the experience which is really changing the brain, But the other 3 very interesting ideas underpinning your work. One is that we are biologically, our brain seeks transcendence. It was trained, it evolved to survive, but there's also an impulse in it, whether through music, whether through spiritual practice, or through psilocybin, or anything. It seeks transcendence, it seeks unity.
Right.
The second is this parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system, So is that really what triggers spiritual experiences? And the fourth is what, is really at the heart of this, which is that when your default mode network dies, your idea of ego self shuts down, and you merge with this sense of unity. Is that because you're entering a different chamber of your brain? Or is it because then when when that part of your brain shuts down, you're able to access other dimensions which are not part of your normal physical spectrum of senses, So these are that, in which case, does God live in your brain? Or is it that your brain then becomes a tuning instrument to another higher dimension, So
Right.
Those are the questions which underpin your work. I wanted to ask you, studying this, what is the sympathetic, parasympathetic, function in our body? And what is your understanding that is it the physiology that creates the experience, or is it the experience that changes the physiology?
Wow. So they're very, very important and very challenging questions. But it's something that really lies at the heart of a lot of the neurotheological research that we've been doing. Let me start with the big question, which is, what's causing what. And I think one of the things that's very important for people to realize is that while this brain scan technology is amazing, we've never had the ability to look at the brain the way we have now in today's society and in modern science. We have to understand and acknowledge the limitations of what these brain scans show us. And basically what they're showing us are correlates. We can see what's going on. We can talk to somebody, we can talk about what their experience is, and then we can see the change that's going on in the frontal lobe, in the parietal lobe. But what we have a much more difficult time trying to figure out is, where is that arrow of causality? Is the brain causing these experiences? Is the brain receiving these experiences? And the short answer is, I don't know. There's a lot that we don't know, which is part of what gets me excited about all of this, because it means we have much more to explore. But the reason I say that is that, I think at some point we might be able to find ways of designing studies to explore that very specific question. Whether we ultimately will be able to or not, I don't know. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is that we have to be very careful. I think in sort of the Western scientific perspective, there is this notion that, oh, there's the change in the thalamus, there's the change in the frontal lobe, it's the brain causing it to happen. I take a psychedelic experience, I take a psychedelic drug, and it changes my perceptions of the world. The drug caused the experience. But that causal perspective is much more complicated and nuanced than that. And I think neurotheology really talks about this, which is that we have to be careful about what assumptions that we make and how we interpret the results of the science. What the science tells us is what's going on in our brain when we have the experience, not whether it was caused by that experience. And if you watch a car drive by and you have the experience of seeing the car, well, did the brain cause that experience, or did the car cause the experience? Of course, the car is out there, and so it changes our perceptions of the world because we see the car, and in that sense, it caused it within us. On the other hand, it is also our brain which is helping put together those images so that we have a sense of what it is that we just saw. And I suspect that may ultimately be the real answer, which is that it's a little bit of both. It's probably bi-directional, that our brain is always helping to sort of put together our perceptions of reality, but there's a reality that's out there, and if there's a spiritual reality out there, then our brain should theoretically be able to tap into that as well.
But I'm going to pursue that in a moment in a different direction.
Okay.
Then. But before that, another very interesting thing, and which will be, I think, very important for the audience, is that we've always known that there are many paths to the same experience.
Yes.
And it's fascinating that your scanning of the brains has shown that actually different spiritual paths trigger different parts of the brain,
Right.
And then bizarrely or interestingly, the actual feeling of unity, the same neural architecture of faith kicks in,
Yes.
So it's fascinating what you've always known, that different religious paths, different spiritual paths have different, pathways to the same thing. And you've actually shown that the brain actually responds differently. So do share that. Say a chanting monk or a praying nun or a Hindu sage, that why are those experiences different? The pathways are different, and then the experience is the same.
Yes, absolutely. You make a really great point. I said this at the beginning, that there's so many different parts of the brain that turn on or get involved in these experiences. And in fact, we've always postulated that there is a whole network of different structures that are part of this process. And as you mentioned, on a very simplistic level, if somebody is meditating and they decide to meditate on an image, on a candle or on a spiritual image, well, that's going to do something visual, and it's going to activate the visual areas of our brain. If they're going to use a mantra or a prayer and repeat that prayer, well, that may be something that's verbal or language-based. And so there's a different part of our brain that becomes part of that process. But that ultimately, as people have different experiences, if a person experiences a sense of oneness or connectedness, as you mentioned, we tend to see a lot of the same changes going on. We see the parietal lobe starts to quiet down in those cases, whether somebody feels at one with the universe, at one with some universal consciousness, one with God, or even one with each other. And I think that's a very important point. You mentioned the autonomic nervous system, which has to do with our arousal and calming reactions to the world around us. And when we engage in rituals, the rhythmic elements of those rituals can be very energizing. We can get very, roused up in energy, we're dancing or something like that, and we feel a profound sense of a rush of energy and arousal experience. Or we can get into a meditation where over time, with that repetitive focusing on the mantra, we get calmer and calmer.
But in that, the mystery of the human body, what got my attention was when I was reading about your work was that you might rouse yourself into a particular way, and then your body's all, and then the body automatically tilts you over into, there's a kind of tension to that. So,
Yes.
or you're deeply praying and you're very calm, and then your body switches. And so, this switching game that the body does, and so leading you to a particular experience, it's fascinating that the human body works like that.
Well, the human body and the human brain are immensely complex, and again, that's part of what's fun to study from a neuroscientific perspective. But what Shoma was talking about is that the autonomic nervous system, as I mentioned, has an arousal and a calming side, and normally they kind of antagonize each other, which makes sense because you want your arousal system. If suddenly the building was on fire, that's not the time to take a nap. That's the time to get out, and you want to have that feeling of arousal. But there are times when people are engaged in different spiritual practices and have spiritual experiences where you really get both. And so there is this turning on, as she was talking about, this kind of shift of activity where you can have a profound sense of arousal and a profound sense of calm at the same exact time. And so that can be in many ways part of what is a key element of these mystical type of experiences, enlightenment experiences, that not only are all these other sort of cognitive and emotional things going on, but you feel it deep within your body, and you feel this incredible rush of energy and incredible feeling of blissfulness at the same time.
And I'm not going to stay on the fact that it has very beneficial aspects for you in terms of calming you, your heart, your lungs, everything. The physiology of it, the spiritual practices help. There's kind of no debate around that, so I'm not going to stay on that question. But I do want to push you on one thing before calling our next speaker on board, which is that the psilocybin experiences, which are whether through any of them, whether through LSD or through psilocybin, there is the same experience, which is that your ego self shuts down. And almost everybody comes back with saying that they felt this incredible love, they felt unified with the universe. And that makes you wonder that then is spiritual practices really just a function of your brain,
Right.
If a chemical, well, not a chemical, if other components can do that to your brain, then is the spiritual experience and a drug-induced experience the same thing? And because the ego self shuts down, what would be your response to that?
Well, in the world of neurotheology, part of what I talk a lot about is the idea that there are different pathways to all of these experiences, and it could be meditation, it can be prayer, it can be psychedelic experiences. Sometimes it happens when people have different disorders like seizures and so forth. And they're all different ways in which the brain alters its functioning. It gets back to the first question, though, which is, so is that altered functioning what's causing the experience, or is it kind of setting us up to be able to receive an experience? And the analogy that I often use when it comes to psychedelics is that I wear glasses. And so when I wake up in the morning, I don't have my glasses on. It's a very blurry world. And I put my glasses on and suddenly I can see the world clearly. Now, reality hasn't changed. In some sense, my brain hasn't changed, but I see the world in a different way. And so it's possible that, yes, when you take a psychedelic, it's changing what's going on at the neuronal level and inducing these kinds of experiences. But it's also possible that it enables our brain to get to a new level of functioning that allows us to see the world in ways that it had never been able to do before. And so I think that it's important for us to study what the effects of these different substances. We know where they go in the brain, but it also brings up one other very, very important question, which addresses the same things that you're asking about. And I pose this to a lot of my neuroscience students. I say, well, look, we've got neurons firing, we've got electrical activity, you've got sodium and potassium ions crossing the neural membrane, you've got neurotransmitters and serotonin and dopamine. Well, where in all of that is our thought? Where in all of that is our consciousness? And we don't know. We don't have a way of knowing that exactly. So while we can see these correlations and see these relationships, the good and the bad of it is that it's a lot more complicated, and we have a long way to go before we really understand them.
And that's a good moment in which for me to bring in, traditions that do seem to have understanding about this experience. And I'd like to call on stage Sadhvi Bhagwati Saraswati, She's a global interfaith leader and part of the Ramakrishna mission as well as the Vedanta tradition. Sadhvi Bhagwati Saraswati, please welcome her on stage. Sadhviji, thank you very much for being here. I wanted to share with the audience that she was called to Hawaii to speak to a large gathering there, and she actually reneged on that to come here. So a big thank you for prioritizing us. So Sadhviji, I wanted to share, again, to start with the personal before we kind of telescope outwards, that you were, in fact, a psychology student at Stanford, and you were kind of, the hippie generation, and you came to India not looking for a spiritual experience at all. You came here out of curiosity, and you had a transcendent experience on the banks of the Ganga. Do talk to us about that.
Sure. I came here 30 years ago at the age of 25 as a Stanford grad in the midst of getting a PhD in pediatric neuropsychology. I knew nothing about India. I mean, I knew the basics, but nothing that would have drawn me to come. I was not a conscious spiritual seeker. I agreed to come as a short holiday adventure break in the midst of my PhD program, only because I was a very strict vegetarian and an avid traveler. And what I had seen across the world was that wherever I was in the world, if I wanted to make sure to get pure vegetarian food, that I just had to find myself an Indian restaurant. And so I agreed to come as this adventure break, knowing that at least I would be able to eat happily. But something very beautiful and very critical happened on the airplane. As we were flying to India, I had a moment of saying, this trip makes no sense. I'm flying across the world to a country I know nothing about, when I can get great Indian vegetarian food on my corner. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I realized there must be some other reason I was coming. And so I took a vow, and the vow was just to keep my heart open. We call that Sankalp Shakti, or you can think about it as the power of intention. I, of course, had no idea about any of this at the time. It just arose from within me to take this vow. Then get to India, come to Rishikesh, and I go down to the banks of this river, the Ganga River, a river I didn't even know was sacred. And I'm standing on the banks of this river that's worshipped as the mother goddess, as the bestower of liberation. And I was gifted with an experience of being in the presence of a pervasive divine. And it began as I looked out over the river, but then it stayed with me no matter what I was looking at. And so it could be a family, a child, a telephone pole, a tree, a marble step. And suddenly everything was pervaded by, was really nothing at its core other than this divine presence. And I then turned it inward and realized, oh my God, I am not the story I've always told myself about myself. I am not all of those ways I've always identified, the positive and the negative, the entire role. I am not separate. I'm not separate from anything, from the divine, about whom I had never really thought. I'm not separate from the universe. I'm not damaged, broken, not good enough in any way whatsoever that I had struggled with so much in my youth. But here I am, one with this pervasive presence. And it, as you can imagine, transformed my life. And just quickly over the next week or 10 days, I had a series of experiences that I won't go into right now, but that in retrospect you could call mystical experiences. And they were experiences that led me exactly to where I am right now, the ashram I now live on, Parmarth Niketan, to the spiritual master under whom I was destined, if you believe in that, to study. And it was the ripple impact of that vow that I had taken that opened my heart and opened my scientist mind, because otherwise I would have said, there is no way that any of this is possible. But that power of willingness, openness, transformed everything.
Thank you for sharing that story, Sadhviji. And I'm going to come back to probe this inner technology of surrender. But before that, I wanted to come back to you, Andrew, that, Sadhviji just described an experience where she wasn't looking for any transcendence, which actually in a way runs counter to some of the work that you're doing, which is that when you are praying, when you are practicing, your physiology changes, and that's when, things kick in. But here's somebody who's like not looking for it, and it still kicks in. What would explain that in terms of neural architecture?
Well, one of the things that's interesting, the information I was talking about in terms of some of these core elements really kind of fell out of a research study that we had done, as I mentioned, where we asked people about their intense spiritual experiences, got several thousand of them, and started to analyze what people were saying, not on a brain-related level, but how they described them. And yes, some of my favorite ones were the ones that happened spontaneously, that people were not specifically looking for them. And the downside of those experiences from a scientific perspective is we never know when they're going to happen. So there's never any way for me to say for sure. But my suspicion is that as with all the experiences that we have, our brain and our being and our spirituality, they're all very integrated. And so we never really know exactly when. You could meditate for 30 years and never attain enlightenment, and you can meditate for 5 minutes and get it. So so we never really know what are all the different parameters or the different things that will affect us that will lead to this experience. And sometimes, if you're a religious or spiritual person who believes in God, then sometimes, God's just reaching out to you to have this experience.
Well, again, as our film spoke of, that there's this mysterious evolutionary impulse to merge, whereas the species wants to survive and stay separate, on alert, individual, protective. And then there's another impulse which is just seeking to merge with something beyond, and you're wondering why you're not at home, you're seeking home. So talk to us about that within the Vedantic tradition, Sadhviji, that what is this inner technology of surrender? How does it function?
Absolutely. So first, let me just take a quick step back and give a moment of the framework that we're talking about when we say from the Vedantic tradition. Specifically within the Vedantic tradition, the lineage of Advaita Vedanta, which is a tradition of non-dualism. And what we believe is that our highest, deepest truth is Brahman, is this supreme reality, supreme consciousness. One way of thinking about it is if you imagined that we had an infinite ocean, not several oceans that were broken apart by continents, but an infinite ocean. In the midst of that infinite ocean, there are waves. Now, that infinite ocean would be Brahman, or supreme consciousness, that has the qualities of Sat, truth, existence, pervasiveness, Chit, consciousness, Anand, bliss, but not bliss like I've taken an ecstasy pill and so this is a really great few hours, but Bliss as in the very nature of that awareness, the nature of that presence. And in that infinite ocean, there are these wave forms. That wave form is what we would consider self or Atman, the individual. But the suffering that we experience, which is part of the Sanatana Dharma Hindu tradition, the Vedanta tradition, the Buddhist tradition as well, of course, is this idea of suffering as a core piece of our existence. But we believe that we suffer because of what we call Maya, which is illusion. Maya is the wave saying, I'm just a wave. Look at how big I am. Look at how tall I am. Look at how short I am. It's not fair that wave is bigger than I am. Or look, I'm the wave that's going to crush you. That avidya, lack of wisdom, that makes us identify as the wave. And for me in my life, I had lived my life identifying as the one with privilege, the one with opportunity, the one from Hollywood, the one with the Stanford degree, the smart one, but also identifying as the challenges and the struggles and the trauma that I had been through. Because in the midst of the privilege and prosperity, I also had experienced very severe trauma, abuse, abandonment, addiction, eating disorders, a whole beautiful plethora of challenges to work with. And they had been really my identity. If you had said to me, who are you? I would have said, oh, I am the one who was abused or was abandoned or gets the A+. And what Vedanta reminds us is, no, you are not. You are the one who is aware. You are that light of awareness. You are ocean. At the core of who you are is that Brahman. And so that veil gets pulled off. You know, you were speaking about psychedelics and different techniques, these technologies of meditation. That's the core one, of course, in our tradition, but also a technology of inquiry. Who am I? Practices like niti niti, not this, reminding us I am not the clothes I wear any more than I am the neurochemistry in my brain, the patterns of electricity and chemistry that we call thoughts or emotions or memories or personality. I am not that. I am this pervasive presence. I am ocean rather than wave. When we realize that, that's when the suffering ends. And for me, on a personal level, I feel at this point in history that this is critical for us. And whether we get in through a technology like meditation that has been refined over thousands and thousands of years to really help us in a much more permanent way access that, or whether we get in through plant medicine or through synthetic medicines that people are using to at least access that temporarily. There are ways of pulling back a veil. They're just ways of pulling back the curtain and saying, you are not this illusion. You are that unity, that oneness, that indivisibility. And so for me, when that experience happened automatically, I then got into a practice of meditation, of inquiry, of re-remembering, oh yeah, I am not the story, not the drama, not the narrator, but actually that unified divine consciousness. And these days, with the violence and the war and the climate change and the oppression and the exploitation, I feel like this experience of consciousness, however we get in, is critical. Because until and unless we have that, as long as we see ourselves as objects, as just the instruments, well, then we see ourselves as separate. I'm an object and you're an object, and there's this empty space between us, and then I can harm you and oppress you, see you as the other. But when we realize that actually there's a oneness, well, then there is no other. Then division and polarization and the violence and the exploitation and all of that, slowly, it dissolves. And so I've gotten to a point of beginning to say that our spiritual practices have become our social responsibility to touch that experience of consciousness that reminds us, I am not separate, not from the water, not from the trees, not from the air, not from our sisters and brothers of every species, regardless of their ability to reflect consciousness. Because, you were asking about the brain and the physical aspect, which is creating what? Well, what we believe is that consciousness is, Brahman is, this is the truth. But our brains are instruments, mechanisms of the ability to receive and reflect that consciousness. In the same way that a radio broadcast or a TV broadcast is broadcasting. But if your radio is off or broken or a very poor quality one, you're not going to be able to pick up the signal. And these practices of meditation, of prayer, of inquiry, of psychedelics are ways of tuning that radio or TV in a long-term way or a short-term way to be able to pick up that frequency for our own spiritual evolution, for our own enlightenment, God realization, self-realization, end of suffering, as well as so that we can be instruments of peace, of consciousness in the world.
That's an amazing description, actually, Sadhguruji. So, I wanted to pose this question to both of you, that I guess one of the interests, and you've already explained that even Silas, and it's very generous of you to place it on the same plane, and I'll ask you then, what is the difference, between a spiritual practice and, say, a psilocybin practice? And we have on the stage asked that question before, and it's interesting for me to know that, let's say when the ego self shuts down, you could then have an experience of fear. You could have an experience of hatred, It's amazing and interesting that across culture and across time, when the ego self, which is the default mode of your brain, shuts down, what people experience is a feeling of love and unity, That seems to indicate that there's something out there, a dimension which your radio kind of tunes into. But having said that, I want to pose a different question, which is that, do you think then this could just be culture, that when your ego self shuts down, you're kind of acculturated to feel, because you've heard this from others, there's an expectation that you will feel love, So Andrew, when you're doing your tests, or when you've spoken to thousands of people trying to get to the bottom of this spiritual experience, what have you heard?
Well, I do think that we've talked a lot about in our research a kind of unitary continuum, and I think you're making a very interesting point here, which is that when people are engaged in different practices, especially rituals, there is a sense of connectedness or oneness. And the real question ultimately is, well, what are you feeling at one with? And so when people do have that sense of oneness with, as the example she was just bringing up about the ocean and kind of all of the universe, then because the person is connected to the entire universe or connected to all of humanity, there does tend to be a feeling of a reduction of antagonism, a reduction of hatred, because how do you hate something that's you?
That you're part of.
Yeah, that you're part of. And so I think that very much is the case. What we are also left with, though, are many circumstances where things don't go so well with that. And I think that part of what happens sometimes is that we can feel at one with a more limited group, whatever that is, a group of people or whatever. And the problem with that then sometimes is that you feel a deep sense of love and connection, and
Only to your group.
Only to your group. And so anything outside of that group becomes unreal, evil, and so forth. And so again, I mean, part of what I hope some of the research that we do helps us with is to try to understand those times where things don't go well and it creates antagonism and hatred and so forth, versus the times when it doesn't. Because you can be a small group and feel connected to all of humanity, and so you still love all of humanity, even though you yourself are a small group. But then there are other times when it's a small group and then it becomes an us versus them. And it also ties back to some of the things that you were asking earlier about the survival piece of our species, of all species. There is as an us versus them. And so, you look at so many different mammal species throughout the world, their clan, their kin, their group, they will defend, against an outside person or an outside being, that even if it's the same species. So it's very complex. That's part of what I think, part of where I've come in my own ways of thinking about this is that I think the spiritual side of things has so much to offer, and we need to learn from all of that. But there are also certain things that the scientific side brings, and so trying to find ways of bringing them together, to me, is what ultimately will lead us to answers that will be helpful for everyone.
But
yes, sure. So, as you can imagine, I have a lot to say on love. I think, first of all, going into it for just a moment from the science and then expanding outward, to me, I believe that when the veil is removed, and again, whether it's removed meditatively, whether it's removed through a spontaneous experience, whether it's removed through the assistance of synthetic or natural chemicals, we tap into what I believe is truth rather than acculturation. And from that scientific perspective, the reason that I believe that is if we look at whether it's very young children who grow up in very loving, healthy homes with healthy patterns of attachment, these kids are not grabby, selfish, violent, aggressive, afraid. If you look at the Galapagos Islands, one of my favorite teachings in the world is that we have these islands that Darwin was studying, where all of these species that we think of as either violent toward us, like sharks or stingrays, or afraid of us, like turtles, big turtles, or birds, they had never had any predators because of how far away they were from the mainland. And so these species evolved without fear and without violence. You go and you snorkel amongst sharks, amongst stingrays. There's no attack, no violence. You literally, if the guides didn't stop you, could go up and hug a huge big turtle without it receding into its shell. The big, beautiful birds are doing their, mating dances for you, not flying away, not afraid, because they were never trained evolutionarily to be afraid or to be aggressive because there weren't predators. So to me, what that signifies is something that spiritually we speak about, which is that the core truth of who we are is actually that oneness and love. And I don't mean it, by the way, in a wishy-washy way. I mean that experience of awe, that when we look up at the stars in the sky, that when we look in the eyes of a newborn child, when we have experiences of divine connection, we may experience it through listening to Beethoven. We may experience it through looking at an extraordinary piece of art. I have very many beautiful, powerful spiritual experiences just opening up NASA's Instagram page. It's like, oh my God, the nebula. Oh my God, the, galaxy next to us. Look at this extraordinary creation. And it's an experience not of voyeurism, but an experience of connection, an experience of actually not being separate from the nebula or the galaxy or the stars in the sky or the soul of this brand new newborn into whose eyes we are looking. And that experience of connection is, we believe, our truest self, which is why, by the way, we love, as a species, we love being in love, even just in love with other humans or with our pets, because that experience of love removes the sense of border and boundary between us, and suddenly I've gone from being me separate over here to being we. And even if it's just a two became one we, that's a portal. And it's a portal into the awareness that I am not something that ends here. That this border, this boundary that seems so tangible, so thick, actually in even just a moment of hugging a loved one or looking in the eyes of a loved one, or rolling on the ground, playing with your cat or your dog or whatever, or hugging a tree, or for me, NASA's Instagram page. It brings us back into that state of, oh yeah, I'm not just this tiny little thing over here. I'm not the wave that rises, that changes, that falls, that's trying to grab more water. I'm not that story. I'm ocean. And that experience of returning to source. Everything here is trying to return to its source. If you drop water down, it's going to come down. We call it gravity, but we actually believe that the reason the gravity works is that the source of water is the earth, the ocean. Fire goes up. Again, we can use physics words to describe it. Science is beautiful. I love it. But just because we can describe something doesn't remove the power of it. The fact that we can describe molecules of H2O bonded together doesn't change how good it feels to drink water when your throat is parched. Just because we know how zygotes separate into embryos, into fetuses, doesn't change what it feels like to look in the eyes of your newborn child. And in the same way, that science that we have that brings us in, that explains, is wonderful. But it's explaining something that I deeply believe existed long before, and that's where we are looking to return to our source, as water returns to its source, as fire returns to its source in the sun. Our source is expansiveness. Our source is not bordered, boundaried, separate. And so we're looking for experiences to return to source. And it's why being in love feels so good. It's why looking at the stars feels so good. It's why having these psychedelic experiences touches us so deeply, because we're returning to source. It's not creating it. It's re-reminding us.
But that... that was a very profound description, because it makes my next question feel a bit clumsy, to still insist on kind of interrogating it, because like you said, there is that beyond, the kind of desire for empiricism. And, no scientist actually ever comes here and wants to say definitively, but everyone points to it, that quantum science is actually, in a way, mirroring this idea that, when it is only the observing self that locks the quantum realm into one particular property. but it's the observer's relationship with that. But without that, it's living in an indeterminate, all states all at once, So it's fascinating that the Vedanta tradition kind of, without getting woo-woo, but it definitely mirrors that conception, of reality, that it's you that's really fixing it into one narrow description, but otherwise it's in play and it's in an oceanic state, But my last question to both of you, and as I said, I'm sorry to bring it down again to something which is skeptical, but I want to channel the kind of empiricists and rational fundamentalists who, if they were sitting on this stage, would pose different questions. Prime amongst them is Javed Akhtar, a very famous lyricist and creative mind in India, and he would say all of this is great, but the only instrument through which you're really experiencing this is the physical brain. It is the biological being, and if you surrender that, then there is nothing else. There's no other way to even describe this. And so it really is only a play of the physiology of being human. What would both of you say if Javed Saab was sitting here and mocking this conversation in his habitual way?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I would say, first of all, I don't disagree at all with the premise. This physical body, particularly the brain, is to me unquestionably, inarguably, the instrument through which we experience and can interact with consciousness. Absolutely, no argument whatsoever. However, the fact that the brain is the instrument through which we interact with it and experience it does not, to me, then translate into the idea that it is simply a play of the brain. For example, raise your hand if you've ever experienced deep love for anyone. Doesn't have to be God, for a family member, for anyone. Raise your hand if you've ever experienced love. Okay, well, I hope it's more than that, but most of us, hopefully, have experienced love. Now,
that was a very honest audience. There were many who did not raise their hands.
I was a little saddened by that.
We'll have a therapy session.
Well, it's all right. There's a lot of time
and
left.
Andrew Newberg's shop is open.
So I ask that question because when we have experienced love, for a spouse, for a child, for a parent, for a tree, for God, for a sunset, we know it. Now, when someone starts to have dementia, which I've been dealing with my mom over the last 5 years after a very, very severe stroke, cerebral hemorrhage, something very interesting happens. She gets angry. She gets violent. She no longer recognizes. People say, well, does she still love you? Well, I know on what I would call a soul level she does, but if you were looking at it empirically, there would be zero evidence. Neither is she acting like it, nor is she speaking like it, nor could you say you can see it in her eyes. I couldn't even empirically tell you she recognizes me. And yet, I do not believe there is a neuroscientist in the world who would say that our dendrites or our glial cells are creating love. And yet, we know in Alzheimer's and dementia, we know the aspect of the brain that starts to fall apart, creating a cluster of symptoms that we call dementia. But that doesn't mean that the love that is no longer able to be experienced or expressed or known or interacted with was either created by or existed only in those cells. And so when you speak about it being a play of the brain, I would say the brain is just the instrument. It's the instrument, like this microphone is an instrument. Is my voice here even if the mic stopped working? Of course. But if the mic is damaged, or it gets unplugged, or it runs out of batteries, literally or metaphorically, it's no longer going to work. And so absolutely the brain is the instrument through which, and it's why, by the way, it's why in our spiritual tradition, the human birth is considered the pinnacle of evolution. Because it is believed that the human brain is the only brain, and whether we look at prefrontal cortex, whether we look at parietal lobes, whether we look at any aspect of the brain, that it's the only aspect of the brain that is able to be conscious of consciousness, to be aware of awareness, to look at itself and say, I am not that. I am the one aware that anger is arising. I am the one aware there is a pattern of chemical and electrical activity that we could call depression or anxiety or sadness or sexual arousal or joy or whatever it may be. But I am not that because I'm the one aware of that. And I'm the one who existed before that particular pattern began. I'm the one who will be there after that pattern dissipates and a different pattern arises. Like the ocean is there even after the wave comes down and before another wave rises up. So it's believed that the human body brain is the only one able to have that experience, which is why it's said it's the pinnacle of evolution and that we all should feel extraordinarily blessed to have this tool. But to say that it is therefore a play of the tool, I think honestly, it allows us to abdicate responsibility for being handed this tool. And to me, from a spiritual perspective, I feel like there is not only a deeper truth, but a deeper responsibility to be given the ability to understand the self, to pull back the veil, to love, to feel oneness with the creation. And that is what is meant to be our truth, that experience of whether we say nirvana or moksha or enlightenment. And it is meant to be that which guides our actions as we move through the world.
Thank you very, very much, Sadhviji. Andrew, I'm just going to bring you in on one last. I want to pin you down on your personal, please don't leave it in the indeterminate state. Okay. Be the narrow self for a moment. That having studied this, are you more drawn to the descriptions that Sadhviji has been giving us, or do you stay in the skeptical state more?
Well, I probably, I was thinking about your question, and I generally take a bit of a middle ground. So I have a feeling, and I don't have any proof to this, but my best guess at the moment is that the way that we look at reality, to your point about the analogy of quantum mechanics, if we look for the spiritual part of reality, we find that. If we look for the material part of reality, like the other gentleman you were talking about, we find that. My guess is that there are probably just two ways of looking at the same thing. But until we ultimately figure it all out, I guess we still have more questions to go.
Thank you very much, both of you. It's been absolutely wonderful speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have half a second? I just want to say thank you to you and for your team, because there's a lot of really powerful conferences and events on technology, on science happening in the world these days, on AI, on all of this. But to bring in the spiritual component is so beautiful and so important. And it shows a vision that you have. And Mahatma Gandhi ji said so beautifully, what is the point of that fast speed that doesn't have direction? And I feel like science and technology gives us so much speed, but spirituality gives us direction. And you've brought that together, and just such deep gratitude to you and the whole team for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sabri. Just color-wise, you should be in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for having us here. Keep in touch.
Yes. This is good to be. We're going to change the lens completely now and go from that deeply profound spiritual discussion. I'll just take a moment for you to settle down. Because it was a Sunday morning, we're running 10-15 minutes late, so I would ask you to cooperate. We're going to move into our next session, which is a complete lens shift, because it's going to take us into the realm of war and conflict and geopolitical competition, and the role that AI is playing in really pushing those frontiers and boundaries to places that are difficult to understand and grasp, the sheer scale of it, the speed of it. And we're going to have on stage, I'll just wait for a moment for you to settle down. We could ask the console to play one of the films so that everybody gets a chance to sit down.
Hoy es un día radiante y blanco. Yo y mi compañía tomaremos el flanco. Mi voz es la fuerza que tira como un arco. Saeta lírica del más puro estilo hardcore. Ríndanse, somos el desembarco. Dulce como un caramelo hardcore. Luces iluminan a este flaco. Alexini NC, tiradores francos.
Páginas en blanco que trazo de colores. Busco iluminarme y esparcirme como el polen. Tome fotos de este arco iris. No entiendo lo que pasa, tengo la equipa en la iris. Dirty, una noche bien oscura. Lo único que quiero es hacerte travesuras. Una, tirambo shows extra. Somos las voces que tu parlante revientan.
No tienes brillo, yo soy el sol. Un viejo chiquillo dándole color. Soy el descubridor de la alquimia del estilo. Convierto las ideas en metal amarillo. El mundo es mi papel, lo pinté con un rodillo. Dios es un marciano que vigila en su platillo. Tráenos mujeres, marihuana y papelillo. Hagamos uno grande en forma de barquillo.
Si te pillo, yo te pinto el sol. Yo voy paseando en la tinta de un plumón. Me satisfazco con la libre expresión. Acá cada uno se libera de su tensión. Como en el sexo, rap intenso. En música, ¿qué te pasa? Te noto algo tenso. No culpa de tirambo, niño, no sea leso. Comando una tropa de colores, carne y hueso.
Colores, yeah, en la vida algo básico. Colores, yeah, para mí es algo mágico. Colores, yeah, miles de combinaciones. Colores, yeah, colores, yeah, colores, yeah, en la vida algo básico. Colores, yeah, para mí es algo mágico. Colores, yeah, miles de combinaciones. Colores, yeah, colores, yeah.
Tengo los ojos rojos y los dientes amarillos. Soy otro más fumador empedernido que se cranea manteniendo el equilibrio. Arma musical cosechada como el vino, alucino. Con cada bombo y caja voy decorando armonías en las plazas. Mi lírica te traspasa y te embaraza. No salgan a la calle que hoy salimos de casa.
Dicen que estoy perdido como el unicornio azul y quieren darme palos como una bola de pool, pero yo no estoy ni ahí. La vida es beautiful y además es cortita y hay que vivirla full. No importa si el micrófono es chacha o es chum, lo importante es el talento que le pongas tú. Yo no voy en tren, tampoco voy en bus, yo me voy volando el aviador Live Tour.
Son 7 colores, 4 creadores, los que conjugan la magia y sabores, colores. Menos mal no fui daltónico, dolores. No son nuestro grupo ideológico, magnífico, show artístico. Eso sí, tirando la bola del místico, típico, acabar en la cantina, contando mis historias a la diosa más divina.
Abusa, tenía el pelo fucsia, un par de buenos senos y la vulva con pelusa con astucia. Yo le saqué la blusa, no llevaba sostenes porque ella no los usa. Confusa, a veces se rehúsa, no cualquier weón le vende la merluza. Si se cruza, en tu camino te engatusa, cuida tu dinero porque ella lo malusa.
Colores,
yeah, en la vida algo básico. Colores, yeah, para mí es algo mágico. Colores, yeah, miles de combinaciones. Colores, yeah, colores, yeah, colores, yeah, en la vida algo básico. Colores, yeah, para mí es algo mágico. Colores, yeah, miles de combinaciones. Colores, yeah, colores, yeah.
A pocket bio of your extraordinary CV. You know, you've been at the nerve center of so many things, which is really the hard edge of the world. I wanted to ask you, first of all, to share with the audience and help us understand how this needle is shifting. You know, when you said you were there when Kandahar was taken, you know, you flew in there, and that was a different nature of war then. How has it shifted? Where are we at in 2026?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to sit in front of so many people here. And
will you speak a little bit louder?
Yes, thank you for having me. It's an honor to sit in front of so many people, and just the presentation. I was saying backstage, actually, I'm more terrified by you than large language models, because your ability to just manage all of these topics is unbelievable, unbelievable. I think, you know, starting in the beginning where we were, and to your point, for me, it's not theoretical. It's practical, it's operational, it's what I've done my entire adult life. When we went into Afghanistan in 2001, I wish the systems that we had now had been in place, because had they been in place, the attacks on New York City, the attacks on the Pentagon, they never would have happened. And I can only imagine a world where, had we been able to connect those dots, where we would be today as a civilization, a global civilization. That said, they happened. It's a very real fact. And so now, as I look at the tools that we had at our disposal in the early days of the war, and even prior to that, my first deployment was in Bosnia as a member of the Peace Stabilization Force. We were using hard copy maps. We were putting laminate over them and using Sharpies and getting reports on even stickies, and trying to correlate those to information that we had associated with the environment we had never operated in before. And so our ability to understand the environment, to conduct a meaningful operation under the laws of war and the rules of engagement that we had, we did the best we could with what we had under the guidance of make sure the threat is suppressed. As I look at where we've moved today, and it has been a fairly rapid technological change, even though, you know, I was a very young man in 2001, and now I'm a pretty old guy.
Young now as well.
But looking at just that 24 years, the ability to take technology that initially was maybe started for the national security platforms, I'd say now transitioned and perfected for the commercial sectors, and then coming back in and taking some of that technology and incorporating it in, I'd say that we're in a place that our ability to be precise is 100-fold better than when we started the war.
But just again to draw the audience into this world, that can you be a little bit more specific about, when you say that your ability to be faster, what is this new canvas? What is the data that you're really plumbing? What are the different data sets? Where are you gathering that from? And then what is the role that AI is playing in that? And when you say precision, over the last 2 days, we've been talking about how imprecise actually AI can be, especially the LLMs. So I want to know if you're using something else, if you're using the LLMs. So give us, again, like I said, the specificities of this. Start with the data sets.
Okay, I'll start with the data, which is easy for me as I'm a data guy and I usually do AI in air quotes. The data, just ensuring that you have access to all of your own data. When I started at U.S. Special Operations Command as the first chief data officer, there were these grand dreams of artificial intelligence and how it's going to power our way forward. And we had an idea and we knew that we needed to get our data organized and do that. But I remember turning to the then commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, General Tony Thomas, and saying, I just want to be able to count our stuff and know where it's at. And so when you think about that journey, how do we identify our siloed data sets, some of which we use to sense the environment, some of which we just use to understand the assets that we have at our disposal, and how do we start to ensure that none of those are siloed so that we can take advantage of all of the data that's presented itself in front of us. Now, we obviously have signals intelligence, human intelligence. We have all of the intelligence disciplines that we account for. I think one of those that even prior to my arrival as the chief data officer at US SOCOM was publicly available information. I remember when we were trying to confront, right after ISIS had taken Mosul and were conducting horrific acts across Syria and Iraq, they were very effectively using the information environment to recruit troubled, I'll say youth, from around the world. And so our ability and my goal was to stop the foreign terrorist fighter flow. How could I do that? So I went out and I looked at the publicly available information. I looked at the sensitive intelligence we had to understand who the influencers were, how they were conducting propaganda, information operations, to get these troubled youth into a net so they could begin funneling them into this combat environment where then these radical extremists would push them to the front lines as cannon fodder and then continue the cycle. What we tried to do was set up a multinational organization primarily with law enforcement under the umbrella of the U.S. Special Forces' ability to understand how to conduct broad data analysis, bring them in, leverage their own unique authorities, using their own unique data sets so that we could merge those together, leveraging artificial intelligence, using, I'll say advanced analytics at the time, so that we could create an understanding of individuals who, instead of reaching the combat zone, we could pass a packet to law enforcement in their host nation and stop them from coming to the combat zone, and hopefully have family members and friends interdict them before we had to do something about it. So I think looking at all of the information that was available then, and understanding all of the information from a commercially available, publicly available information data that you can run your credit card and use now. Again, I keep saying 100x, but I think we're at 100, 1,000x, even from when we were conducting those activities back in 2014 to where we are now.
From your perspective, this is, like you said, it makes you more effective, it protects soldiers, it possibly is a deterrence, it also prevents, it's preventative, because if you know something's happening, you can stop it before it happens. So give us a couple more examples. For instance, I just read that, in the Venezuela raid on Maduro, that Anthropic's Claude was used for that, So help us understand in what way AI is being used, because we are now moving to a level where there isn't human intervention, that AI is taking the decisions. help us, even in bombing in Gaza, Israel used Where's Daddy, it used lavender, and one understands that there's no human intervention in that. How are the parameters for this set?
I'll try this.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think when we talk about individual large language models, which one was used, I would tell you that we regularly use multiple. That each large language model has a particular capability that it's better at than others. Leveraging platforms like Palantir's artificial intelligence platform, where you can bring multiple data sets, thousands of data sets, almost infinite amount, in that would be required. What we're able to do, leveraging the current state of generative AI, is put those in a method and get them into workflows where they're leveraging what we have already considered authoritative data sets.
You've already considered?
That we consider authoritative data sets,
okay.
that we are being provided authoritative data sets, or the government is saying these are our authoritative data sets. And then what we can do is box those data sets and build workflows with domain experts who understand how this will let them be more precise in whatever war fighting function that they conduct, whether that's fires, whether that's logistics, whether that's information operations, whatever that might be. And so it has enabled us to understand and sense the environment in new and unique ways, faster than we could have before. In some instances, if the workflow demands a predictive analytic for a uniformed service member, then they now have that ability to do their job with more precision and efficiency than they've ever been able to do it before.
But the phrase AI kill chain is now coming into popular consciousness. Help us understand how an AI kill chain happens. That's what I was asking you, that who would set that? Is it that the AI independently sets a target, it's doing its own parameters, its own analysis, and it tells an autonomous drone to drop a bomb and kill someone without a human intervention?
No, it does not. It absolutely does not.
You're just scared of saying that is what it is.
Yeah, no, it does not. What it allows, I'll say, a fires officer in an operations center to do is to have a quicker understanding of where there might be a threat. And what they're able to do is to get to that capability faster. What it allows them to do is to use different types of information to correlate that actually is a threat, so that then we can bring more exquisite capability to take a look at that, to determine if that needs to go into what one would consider a targeting board that could then begin an actual validation process that in the past, because it was very manual, because there weren't the automated workflows that went associated with even just digitizing some of these capabilities inside an AIP-like platform. Now we're able to take things that potentially we would have missed because it would have taken a day, 2 days, a week to do the analysis to determine that is actually something that we need to put human eyes on, pay attention to, and bring through what we call a targeting board.
Sure.
To move it to a place that then we can pass that onto a platform that it can actually use the right munition for the right job, sometimes which isn't kinetic.
So, David, again, that's not to, I'm not bringing any sort of moral, social perspective on it right now, because we first want to understand, and it's a very real world of conflict and threat, so one wants to understand the sort of gravity of that before one questions the social and moral implications of it. So when you're saying that, these systems now enable you to analyze faster than the speed of light almost, then that's great, and there's no argument over that. I was asking about the decision making, because when one says that it's an independent AI kill chain, when you're saying it's autonomous weapons, and that this is only the start, the vision is to move further where humans are not in the loop. Help us understand what that is. How does decision making happen?
Yeah.
If you're passing on precise, intelligent, quick data onto a commander like yourself to take a decision, that's more or less traditional war done better. But I'm asking about AI being a decider.
Yeah, we're not at a place where AI is the decider. We're at a place where AI guides us to what we need to pay attention to faster, so that humans can decide faster. Because at the end of the day, when we're talking about the speed of war, the speed of precise decision making is the thing that wins the day. So your ability to get to the place where a human can decide, this is the application of force that I'm going to put on that objective, and I can audit why that happened in a manner that's faster than we've ever been able to accomplish before. That's the step that we're at right now. I think that's when we're talking a kinetic. That's when we're talking a AI kill chain, as you said. I don't use the word kill chain. I use the term targeting, which is doctrinal.
Alex Karp, who's your founder of Palantir,
Right.
uses the phrase AI kill chain all the time.
He's great. He is. I grew up 28 years in uniform and in the federal side, so I often divert to the doctrinal language use that I've just learned over my career. What I would say is, now there's other things that are occurring outside of that targeting process, outside of fires, where force protection is another component of the military vernacular. And when I start talking about counter UAS as an example, it's things like that, things that when we have an inbound unmanned aerial system, we have an inbound threat that we need to respond to, that is where I begin to frankly advocate for autonomous decision making, because the speed with which that inbound threat is coming at us, whether that's a class 1 or a class 3 drone, size matters, we have to be able to respond to that at the speed of need. And I think as you start to look at some of those defensive systems, that we absolutely have to see the human in the loop as a bit of a vulnerability, because these are moving so fast that we need to be able to detect, we need to be able to interdict to save our airmen, soldiers, Marines, Guardians, we've got them all now, so that when they're out conducting operations on behalf of our nations, our partners and allies, that we can defend them effectively. So I think when we talk about autonomy, it's the operations that we're talking about being autonomous, the ones that probably lend themselves to not having a human in the loop, but again, now having an auditability of those that we've never been able to have before.
So, even this data gathering, what is the scale of data that is being picked up, David? And I'm pushing on that because I do have an ancillary question, but is it satellite data? You said public data. Is it the data on our phones? Are you guys hacking our phones? Are you picking up health data, which I know you are? So things which we knew to be siloed data, and you very powerfully said that, and I understand. As I said, in a conflict zone, you said more dangerous for you today than a missile is a siloed data, that you want to know every signal available on the planet before somebody else does, right? So does that mean that we now have to live in a world where we know that from our faces to our license plates, to our health data, to our personal chats, to satellite data, all of that data is now being funneled into companies like Palantir or to any other defense military situation I won't even use I'm not going to use a layered word, just for the objective of analyzing data and knowing where a threat might be emerging?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a commercial corollary here.
A
commercial corollary. My wife, as an example, will ask me, have you been looking at golf clubs? Because all of a sudden in her Facebook feed, she begins getting, tailor-made driver this, tailor-made irons that. And she's determined that I've been, looking for my next purchase. And when you look at how the commercial sector is leveraging your own data to determine what next ad they're going to feed you, I think we're not doing anything more intrusive than that. And frankly, I think the U.S. government is using publicly available information that they're legally either provided or that people are providing themselves, not of our own citizens, but in threat environments, to bring that in and to begin using that alongside data that is collected from traditional intelligence sources, so that we can understand the environment and again facilitate smarter decision making within the laws of armed conflict.
So, David, again, we are, and going to enter into the moral social dimension of this. I'll concede that we may not have the luxury, possibly, to deny the right of those who are in the military or in the government to know this. But there are many implications of you or others having access to all of this data. So I do want to call you out a little bit on when you just said that not on our own citizens, but on adversaries. Right back from Edward Snowden to, even way back to Julian Assange and others, we do know that America is spying on its own citizens. It's also being used right now, say, by the ICE, where they have entire maps, where dossiers of confidence scores. And I was reading, again, it's publicly available, that the data that Palantir is using is literally from, like, you're a moving target, your license plates, your health data, which really should be private data, to your phone chats, your face recognition. All of that is being used for domestic purposes. So to know that, oh, this is a legal or illegal immigrant, you're basically mapping the entire citizenry of America, not to mention possibly in India as well, So first, is that accurate?
No, not exactly. I think that it's not our data, it's the government's data. It's our software.
Well, the government promises to keep it siloed, but you're pretty much telling us that no data is siloed anymore.
I think the commercial sector shows you that their ability to feed you ads that are targeted to your unique needs make it hard to believe that anybody would think that they can move through society with nobody
footprint.
With no footprint. As soon as you opt in to your phone, you're using that data, you're presenting a signature of yourself, and frankly, you're opting in. And so I think there's a component of that we do have to pay attention to. And then I'd say, whatever the laws of a nation are, that's for the government to administer. What I'll tell you is that I'm proud to be with a company that understands how to protect PII, privately individual information, and publicly and private health information in a manner so proficiently that we can do it within the laws that have been provided within the left and right lateral limits that the government wants.
So, I'm just going to stay with this a little bit more, which is about data gathering itself. So, you have satellites, and I've actually asked the Indian military commanders that with this level of satellite network across the planet, how is it that you don't know there's a Chinese buildup on the Indian border? How is it that you don't know? How is it that Israel missed that there was a buildup happening, on October 7th? So at one level, there's this idea of like massive surveillance, and then at another level, there's still ball drops. So one is to help us understand that. And the second is that now you have autonomous submarines, you have autonomous drones, you of course have the satellites. So how do these autonomous instruments know what data to pick up? Like, what are they picking up? What are the parameters being set for autonomous submarines and,
I would have to ask the Navy that, because they're the ones that build those.
You've been a Navy SEAL as well?
No, not a Navy SEAL,
okay.
Marine.
I just thought you've been everything.
But I think we have to understand that everything now is a sensor. We wear sensors on our bodies. I have my Whoop on now. And if you're building a platform, it's collecting data. I still remember in the early days of Project Maven, when we were talking to true commercial AI experts, they said, if you thought you had a data problem before AI, just wait until you move into this environment, because not only is it collecting data, it's producing data, and that's more data that you have to make sense of. And so as we step into an environment where we have systems, and frankly, where again, the commercial sector is launching satellites to sense the environment for agriculture, to sense the environment for temperature changes, to sense the environment for whatever the unique thing might be, that data now can be acquired commercially by somebody. And so I think increasingly the use of publicly available information by nation states, instead of bespoke systems that maybe have more funnels and less breadth, is becoming available and will be used to stop some of those events, or at least be able to understand that they were about to occur, so they can be interdicted before a response option has to.
So just a couple more questions before I bring somebody else onto stage, which is that, you've been saying that it helps more precision and more speed. So I would like to ask about Gaza, for instance, and we had the Israel cyber chief last year, we've had the Mossad chief before, and, the question there is that when there's a capability to assassinate an Iranian scientist several thousand kilometers away, with that level of precision, or pick up a Maduro in Venezuela without any soldier casualty for yourselves rather than there was casualty for others, then why in Gaza has there been so much of collateral damage? And like I said, they do admit to the fact that they've used AI systems like Where's Daddy, Lavender, Is it that there was parameters set where collateral damage was okay, or is it that these systems are not as precise as you make it out in some messy situations?
Yeah, I can't speak for the Israeli military, for the Israeli Defense Forces, and the decision-making processes as they went through their doctrinal targeting capabilities. What I can say is that I know the threat was immense and underground and built for a very long time. And frankly, in my opinion, they were leveraging humans as shields above ground for their nefarious actions and not even military, terrorist operations underground. The ability to target those is probably very hard. I think the extent of that probably wasn't quite as understood on day one as it became the more that they were able to understand and sense that environment. So the munitions that they would use, I would have to guess, but I can tell you that they were very precise, that they're much more precise than carpet bombing in Germany in World War II. And so we can see this evolution that, again, is a response to a horrific act that occurred against the Israeli people in defending themselves.
Right. So this is where some of the other dimensions come in, David, which is that we're talking about immense power now. There's not just the power of traditional military might of America, but there's also, the ideological lens through which one sees any adversarial situation. And then you have all of this data, and then you have autonomous weapons, So to decide whether someone is an adversary or not, to take away all nuance from that situation, whether somebody is just a driver, what is their sort of social situation, that can you resist if the Hamas asks you to be a driver? You're not a killer, you're not one of their armed soldiers, you're part of an ecosystem. I reported in India, in Chhattisgarh, when there was a big sort of face-off between the state and the Maoist movements there. And there were tribals who had no option. They were just caught between the state and the Maoists, and they were often killed. But when you went and spoke to them, you understood their dilemma. They're in a conflict zone. If the Maoists come and ask them to do something, they have to do it. If the state comes and asks them to do something, they have to do it. Is that a situation where one can kind of have 70,000 civilians dead and still call it precise killing?
No, I think that moving into an era where we're using data-driven technologies to be a lot more precise and to be able to parse that, is absolutely the goal. I think that we probably didn't have the same capability then that we have now, that it's improving as our ability to leverage AI to split that hair, to better understand and to better make human decisions associated with when we should or shouldn't take action and the type of action that we should. I think that's the promise of AI. I do think, we've got, I'll say, a ways to go in understanding all the socioeconomic and political drivers and religious drivers associated with how we break all this apart. But that's why we need to continue moving forward with this technology. When we talk about autonomy, I also still think we need to remember, we've been using autonomous weapons, maybe 1.0, for decades. When we used the first laser-guided munition, when we used the first GPS-guided munition, there was a point that a human made a decision and then the weapon released and went to where that was supposed to be. Again, I'll go back to where we started the conversation a little bit. The promise of leveraging AI, of being able to put code on a kinetic capability and have it moving towards an objective now gives us a better opportunity through that whole span to understand and to be more precise about where that target, where that munition goes and what it does when it gets there at a level that 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago, we still were less worried about.
Right. I have so many questions, David, but I'm going to bring someone else on stage to deepen this conversation at a more social, political, and moral level, because it is immense power, and I think it does need to be interrogated. I do want to ask one further question, which is that when you were saying that all our commercial data, like our phones and maybe our earpods, we had a speaker last year called Nita Farahani, and she was warning about an even newer frontier that is coming, which is that now companies are able to pick up not just your overt data, what you did, what you bought, what you said, what you looked at, but that it's being able to pick up your thought data, so it's even so liminal that you're thinking something and your wearables and your phones are picking that up. We also have AI that is doing sentiment analysis now, so you have AI that's running under the surfaces of our public lives, reading your emotions, reading your sentiment, analyzing that, sending that back to whoever, maybe like Palantir is an operating system that's analyzing this. I mean, at some levels, this is just terrifying, because you may have a thought today which changes tomorrow. It doesn't define you as a person, but it's got heat mapped somewhere as you've had a momentary desire to kill your husband, and that makes you a potential murderer, And now we are seeing this in predictive policing. We are seeing it, AI being used in whether prisoners can get parole. There's cultural biases, We're talking about erasing history. Whatever America decided is the Palestinian situation, or Israel decided is the AI is learning that, So it seems to be devoid of so many layers that make up human life, So would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, again, I can only speak to the use of it for doctrinal military operations that I've been involved in. I do understand the corollaries in the commercial sector. I'll go back to those. For some time, I've read about credit card companies as an example.
Sorry, would you just speak?
Every time you make a purchase, grading your emotional score, and then passing that back so that they can target the next ad towards you, they can target the next purchase towards you. I do think that is something that individuals have to be aware of and make personal decisions about how they're using these technologies in their daily lives and what they want to do with them as they opt in or out of leveraging whatever app, on any given day that they want to use.
Opting out, I mean, there's no scope for opting out. We're all in the grid now, So, yeah, so I think that cultural conversation around it does need to grow. And I do want to, David, I understand I'm putting you in some uncomfortable spots, but I do want to concede, like I said, that there are very, very difficult military and security situations that people like you have to deal with, So that is another dimension, but it's seeping a lot into our civilian lives as well. So it's an important conversation. And in that light, I would love to bring on stage somebody else actually who has been a very important, no, please stay on stage.
Okay.
Yes, you're not getting away from this one. You can see how much mayhem that's causing. I'm going to call on stage a filmmaker, an award-winning documentary filmmaker who's made several films, but the one we're going to focus on is called National Bird. And it was made several years ago, but it again is a window into some of the issues that are intensifying in their complexity and urgency and seriousness. It's a film on soldier whistleblowers who used not autonomous weapons, but enabled weapons. It's the kind that David was speaking about, where you press a button and a weapon far away does its thing. And she spoke to soldiers who were traumatized by this, and she made a film with whistleblowers speaking of the costs of war, even though much of this is to create soldier safety. So before we call her on stage, we'd like to show you a little window into her work.
decirlo todo. En muy poco tiempo trataré de no aburrirme con tanto parlamento. Difícil ocultar mucho rato una mentira. Imposible es quitarme estas manchas de tinta que marcan mi vida como cicatrices, estigmas que dan testimonio de mi fe. No me sangran las manos, me sangran las narices. Debe ser por el calor, ay Dios mío, no lo sé. No hay camilla que resista a este cuerpo tan pesado. La coca, el alcohol, lo siento muy hinchado. Un soldado universal, un hombre sin pasado, un dibujo surreal. Animal amarrado, una cadena de prejuicios. Come lo que le dan, no hay lugar para caprichos. Se conforma con un pan. Dime dónde están las grandes carcajadas, el honor, la amistad de las épocas pasadas. Hoy no valen nada, todos viven de apariencia. La hipervelocidad le ha ganado a la paciencia. Y me hablaron de elegancia y de parecer distinto. Y todos en la ciudad parecen ornitorrincos. Música fuerte, siempre con rabia. Música caliente, siempre con rabia. Música potente, siempre con rabia. Música excelente, siempre y con rabia. Es el tiempo, es el momento de reinventarse. Es el viento que con su fuerza puede llevarse. El pasado es pasado, el futuro no lo conozco. Tengo que vivir el presente como un loco. No tiene sentido esta vida solitaria. Dios está ocupado y no escucha mis plegarias. En la aralia, en el frío haciendo freestyle. Nuestra música se escucha aunque no nos veáis. Somos el fly de esta pelota. Somos a los que la creatividad nunca se les agota. Y gota a gota partimos la piedra, mientras otros MCs se nos caen como la hierba en invierno. Se llena más mi cuaderno. Horas de trabajo del poeta del Averno. Pago el arriendo, yo no soy dueño de nada. La tierra la dividen con cañones y granadas. Quédense con ella y háganla pedazos. Y cuando no quede nada, porfa, alcen los brazos. Con una bandera blanca pide misericordia. Te clavarán en un palo y te sacarán las córneas. Esta es poesía ordinaria. Gente de la calle haciendo música con rabia. Música fuerte, siempre con rabia. Música caliente, siempre y con rabia. Música fuerte, siempre y con rabia. Música caliente, siempre y con rabia. Música potente, siempre y con rabia. Música excelente, siempre y con rabia. Música fuerte, siempre y con rabia. Música caliente, siempre y con rabia. Música potente, siempre y con rabia. Música excelente, siempre y con rabia.